Okay, this is episode 3 of Bible Basics. And last time in episode 2, we talked about C.S. Lewis's Trilemma, which can be found in his book, which was originally a set of radio talks during World War II that he recorded, I think, in London. That's where the first broadcast, and later he took the transcripts and fashioned it into this little book. And I described last time how I came across this book. So let me just read you again what captured my attention so vividly, and apparently has captured the attention of a lot of other people because it's become, very well known, although I did not know it at the time. He says, "I am trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him," meaning Jesus, which is, quote, "I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God." Lewis goes on to say, "That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on a level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to." So that's Lewis's Trilemma. Well, today what I want to talk about is the undermining of the Trilemma. How was this Trilemma ever undermined? Well, it wasn't undermined directly. It's not so much, I think, that people attacked it. But there was a series of developments in culture which had caused it to be undermined. And I'll explain what those are in a minute. But first, I want to give you an example of what sort of ran through my head when I read this the first time. I had been raised Roman Catholic, and they didn't spend a lot of time to us reading the Bible, but whenever you had a Mass, they would read something from the New Testament and something from the Old Testament. So after a while, you would pick up a few things, and plus I was an altar boy, and I went to parochial school. So I'd heard a few things. So when he said the kind of things Jesus said, I knew what he was talking about. But in case you don't, let me just give you a few examples. First of all, there was John 14:6, where Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Now, if you were standing there in the crowd that day and you heard him say that, or you heard anybody say that, your antennae are going to go up. What's going on here? And that would naturally provoke the kind of question that Lewis framed. Is this a lunatic? Is it a demon of some type? Or could this possibly be true? Those are the only options you've got to work with. Another one was where Jesus said in John 8:12, "I am the light of the world." Again, you walk up, you're walking down the street and there's a guy standing on the street corner and he's saying, "I am the light of the world." You're going to think one of those three things, maybe not that clearly, but there's got to be some answer to this. People do not talk that way. In fact, some soldiers said that about Jesus one time. They said, in the King James, I think it reads, "Never spake a man thus." No one's ever talked this way before. Let me give you another example. In, John 11, verses, I think it's 25 and 26. Jesus says to Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die." Again, that must have staggered Martha. And she was an admirer of Jesus. She loved Jesus. And she followed him. She listened to his teaching. But still, statements like that just kind of shake you up. And it reminds me of the time Jesus meets this woman at the well. He'd never met her before, so she didn't know anything about him, didn't admire him, didn't know what to think about him. and they're having a conversation, and they get near the end of it, and he's been saying all these things that just amazed her, and she said, well, we know that Messiah is coming, and he'll explain everything to us. In other words, okay, you and I might not be able to settle this, but Messiah will explain all this to you. And he says, I who speak to you am he. I can't imagine what she, just seeing the look. I can't imagine the look on her face when she heard that. So few words. And that's not the kind of quote, I who speak to you am he. That's not, like if I take I am the light of the world out of context, it still is a startling statement. But if I take the statement, I who speak to you am he, that's not necessarily startling. But in that context, that was a very startling thing to say. And I'll just give you one more. This is from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verses 57 and 58. They've been going. The Jewish leaders have been going back and forth with Jesus, and it says, so the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham. He said, Abraham has rejoiced to see my day. So they're incredulous, and they ask him what they believe to be a rhetorical question by saying, you are not yet 50 years old. He was in his early 30s at the time. And have you seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I don't know if I can say it with a straight face. Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am. Now that would make anyone's jaw drop. But for Jews, it would especially make their jaw drop, because that was the name by which God had revealed himself to Moses. I am that I am. That was at the burning bush. So he says, before Abraham was born, I am. So because I had a vague memory of these kinds of statements, I couldn't have quoted chapter and verse, when I was 26 years old and reading the Mere Christianity for the first time, or actually not even reading it. I'm flipping through the book. I wanted to give this guy had loaned me his books. I wanted to give them back. I didn't want to be bothered by them, but I wanted to be able to say that, indicate that I at least had a passing awareness of what they said. And so I'm just flipping through like this. And the page just happened to open up to that and read it. There were maybe 2 or 3 other places in the book I read too, but I don't remember them. This one, obviously, I remember. But when I read those, or when I read that passage, I would remember verses like that. And that's what drove me to the Bible, because I didn't remember enough to decide. But what he said made so much sense. It was just the sheer logic of it. And then that touch of British humor really topped it off. But the logic was impeccable. He was saying, I don't want you to say what many people say today, which Jesus was a great human teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. I would have phrased it this way. I would have said, I respect Jesus as a teacher, but you can't say he's the only way to God. And I couldn't settle the issue. I had to go to the Bible myself. I had to go back to the New Testament, find out, or what did he say? And I actually thought when I went to read the New Testament, I was going to find out that it was subject to interpretation, that maybe he didn't say it exactly like that, there was some other explanation. I was not going there. This logic that he wrote in this book, this Trilemma, did not convince me that Jesus spoke for God. It convinced me that that I was not standing on solid ground in my position of agnosticism, like Jesus is good, and people who believe in Buddha are good, and people who believe in Muhammad are good. And, you can't know who's right or wrong. It's not going to help to read the Bible. But I was going to go and find out for sure. And then when this guy who witnessed to me came back around, I could quote some Bible verses myself and show him that I was right. I fully expected that what I would find in the Bible would validate my agnosticism by being vague, unclear. I did not expect to be converted. So, and I just thought it would be good culturally to read the Bible, been around a long time. I could brag, humble brag, say I'd read the Bible. But I read it and I couldn't deny it. I mean, you read the things Jesus says and you read them in context, and it becomes clear before very long that he wasn't a lunatic and he wasn't a liar. So there's no other conclusion. But I told you earlier in this episode that the Trilemma had been undermined since then. What could have undermined something so logical? Well, the Trilemma said Jesus either had to be a liar, lunatic, or Lord. Well, what's going on in the background? And I guess this was going on even in 1978 when I read this, but it hadn't reached me yet. And that was in biblical studies, there had been at work for at least 100 years this methodology for studying the New Testament and the Old Testament too, called historical criticism. And modern scholars had gone in and said, well, we can't be sure who wrote the Bible. We can't even be sure that everything that's in the New Testament actually happened. And there was a group called the Jesus Seminar. And these were Bible scholars who had varying opinions on what you could take to the bank as truly historical in the New Testament and what you couldn't. And they actually had a system of voting. They had these different colored marbles. And if you thought a certain verse was something that definitely happened, you used one color. And if you thought that it didn't happen, or it might have happened, but you weren't sure, that was a different color. And then if you were 100% sure it didn't happen, then you had a different color. And, there's just all these different colors. And they published a book, and it was called the Jesus Seminar. And that was just one of many, many things that were going on. Basically, professors who studied the Bible all of a sudden said, well, we really can't be sure of any of this. And that agnosticism that had captured my mind and heart through the culture had actually captured the minds of these highly educated scholars too. And then one of the most notable of those scholars was a man named Bart Ehrman. He was a university professor of New Testament. He himself had been a self-proclaimed born-again Christian in his teenage years, but had evolved, that's a good word for that, isn't it? He had evolved into what he calls an agnostic-leaning atheist. And he's written many books, still living, still writing books. This one's called Forged, in which he says, the subtitle says, why the Bible's authors are not who we think they are. Now he, by his own words, he was not inventing these ideas. He was just reporting what scholars were saying, but he was making this available to a popular audience. And speaking of popular audiences, this book has come out in the last 40, 50 years. The Da Vinci Code. They made it a movie. So it was a multi-million copy bestseller. There were multi-million people have seen the movie, and it's a fictional novel. No, what would you say? Historical novel, and it's a fictional story, sort of like Titanic, where they tell the love story in the middle of the true history of Titanic. This tells a story of a fictional story in the midst of the context of the Roman Empire when the Bible was put together. And it takes it states in here that the books in the Bible were not, the books of the Bible were chosen by Constantine or by bishops at his direction, and they arranged the books the way they wanted to. And it was all sort of a big conspiracy. And millions of people, they read this novel and they think that's the truth. They don't understand that the New Testament books came from the people that Jesus had sent out to teach in his name. And as we go through this Bible Basic series, I'll show you that. So anyway, all these things combined to undermine the trilemma. How do they undermine the trilemma? Because now you got an additional choice. It's not just, is Jesus a liar or a lunatic, or is he truly Lord? But now you got, is Jesus just a legend? Or is he just a part of a legend? Is just some of it untrue? Well, if you don't know what's true and what's not untrue, it undermines the whole thing. So I'm out of time today. We'll pick it up here next time, and I'll begin to explain how the trilemma can be strengthened.